Billionaires beware. President Biden is coming for your bucks. The White House unveiled on Monday the so-called billionaire minimum income tax, which would implement a 20% minimum tax rate on all American households worth over $100 million. The pending plan would be part of Biden's 2023 budget. This is according to sources familiar with the plan.
Joining us now to discuss is Julia Manchester. She's a political reporter for The Hill, and Philip Wegmann, who's a White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, Julia, what can you tell us about how this would extract revenue from billionaires or 100 millionaires in ways that are not already included in the tax code?
Right. So we know that this would target probably the 700 richest households or 700 richest billionaires in the country. And we know that sometimes investments in stock and such allow these billionaires to potentially skirt taxes, so they don't pay as many taxes per se as those in lower income taxes. Now, this is something that hasn't been done before. It's very much something that I would say a lot of progressives and Democrats are on board with. But one question I have about this going forward is whether Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema end up supporting this. We know that they've been holdouts on other economic agenda-like items like the Build Back Better program, for example. So we'll have to see how this definitely plays with that more moderate wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What do you think, Philip? I could easily see at least Sinema, well, probably both of them, maybe for different reasons, not wanting. They seem like they don't want to do anything too drastic. They don't want the Democratic Party to do anything too drastic. So you could certainly imagine this being dead on arrival.
But it sounds good, right?
Well, not to me, but maybe to the average Democrat.
It sounds good to the Democratic base for the reasons that Julia just mentioned. And I think the White House knows that they don't always have a lot of luck in Congress, and maybe this is a proposal that is dead on arrival. Maybe they actually don't have the votes, but in the meantime, they will be able to argue at a moment when they're already saying that some of the inflation that we're seeing is because of different corporations that are profiteering. They'll be able to say, well, look, we're ready to get really tough on these billionaires. We're going to really stick it to them. The idea, as far as I know it, is, if there is someone who is making $100 million and they are paying anything less than 20%, that they will be sort of topped off at 20%. So if they're paying 18 in taxes, then that will become 20%. That it'll be just making up that difference. But look, what do we know about really rich people? Well, really rich people are able to hire really smart accountants, and they're able to hire really, smart people to manage their stock portfolios. So I'm not certain if this is going to be a provision that is actually going to raise a lot of revenue, or if this is going to be a provision that is going to make certain that a lot of wealthy people around the country suddenly make $99 million rather than the $100 million that would incur a new tax. But whether or not it is dead on arrival in Congress, I think it's something we are certainly going to see the White House message on.
Yeah, and the big problem for the policy comes in the definition of income, because you have so many billionaires who claim that they have no income at all. They take their stock and they give their stock as collateral to a bank, and then they take what they call a loan from the bank, and then they use the loan to live off. And they're like, well, I had no income. And that's why you had Bezos even got like a child tax credit a couple times, because he's like he gamed it that badly. So I think you could write it in a way that says, okay, that's a game. Like that's income. We are now defining that as income. Whether or not we can get there, I think, like you said, is an open question, or the question might even be shut. But Julia, so what do we do about this question where you have a policy that is supported by an overwhelming majority of the country, and you even have, most policymakers say the inequality that we have is causing, structural rot in our system, but our system itself says, well, too bad, you can't do anything about that.
Well, I think it goes back to like what you said, defining income. What's a good way to target these individuals who are making, huge amounts of money? I think, and what's a good way to stop those loopholes that their accountants or their financial advisors are finding a way around that. And I think that's probably some of the criticism that this is going to get. How are you going to implement this? Is this going to be something in name only, or will this be something implemented in practice? So I think it all has to do with the definition, with who these people are, how much money they're making, and what is income. And I think that's going to be a difficult hurdle, because I think, like I said, critics are going to ask these questions.
Yeah, Philip, does the kind of standard Republican line that used to I guess emerge in cases like this, does it still matter? We're living in a different political world than the Reagan times. So does the standard conservative, like, oh, big government, we shouldn't demonize people who are making the economy work, does that kind of thing still persuade people, or is still a defense or an offense, a form of offense conservatives go to against something like this?
Well, this isn't the Chamber of Commerce's Republican Party anymore.
Right.
I think, as you alluded to in your question, there is a upshot of more populist folks on the right who might be fine with increasing taxes, who really aren't that sympathetic to some of these massive corporations. And I think that if you were to dig a little deeper, what you would see is that a lot of these folks who are more populist, who are more nationalist and on the right, they would say, we don't mind fleecing a corporation or fleecing a rich guy if that person's devotion isn't to the country, if instead their devotion is to the stockholder. But that's sort of this pie in the sky conversation that doesn't have anything to do with details. The last position that Republicans had on taxes was the Trump tax cuts, right? And I don't think that you have seen either the left or the right have a serious conversation about sort of first principles, about that question of what is going to count as income. What are we going to do to seriously make certain that people are paying their fair share, either on the left or the right? Because Republicans' first instinct is, all right, well, can we refurbish something that looked like Reagan and sell it as new? And Democrats, their first instinct seems to be, well, let's just let's float something that makes it sound like we're going to be really tough on the wealthy. And as we've discussed just in these last few minutes, unless you're actually willing to look at the tax code and look at all of the realities as such, people are going to use that tax code to their own advantage. And sometimes it can lead to ridiculous things like billionaires using, child tax credits, or, like billionaires using 401k accounts, right? So, surprise, surprise, you would need serious policymakers in Congress instead of people who like to sound off on Twitter. And I'm not certain which we have more of at the moment.
And Philip, I'm curious for your take on those tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, because I often go back to those when I think about how serious the new Republican Party is about populism. Run on populism, run against the elites, and then your biggest signature piece of legislation is a massive, multi-trillion-dollar giveaway to the very rich. Was that the dying scream of the Paul Ryan wing of the party, or was that actually something that you're going to continue to see in this new Republican Party? Talk a big game when it comes to populism during elections, but then when you get into office, behave just like the last Republican Party.
It was certainly a feature of Donald Trump's presidency, despite a lot of his rhetoric that was, much farther to the right. The way that he governed, or the way that Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan sort of forced him to govern when it came to actually the legislation that was signed into law, was sort of a conventional Republican presidency, right? His big thing, his big legislative achievement was that tax cut. I think that, the question of where the right will be is a difficult one. I don't believe that, rank and file Republicans feel like they got a lot of credit for that tax cut. Certainly there might be some merited frustration because for a long time, there were many in the media who falsely said that, the middle class did not receive, a tax cut, which simply, wasn't true. Whether or not they received as much of a benefit as some of the more wealthy, that's certainly an open topic. But if Republicans don't sort of come up with some vision, if they don't actually have these interesting arguments now, eventually, they'll get into power. They won't know what they're going to do, and then they'll just revert back to the last playbook, and they'll say, "Hey, things were great during the Reagan administration when we cut taxes. Let's try and do that again."
Indeed. Well, Julia, Philip, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.